Welcome to the Cambridge Service Alliance webinar series. Today we have a very interesting presentation from a researcher who is coming from ETH Zurich. Marcus Oy is a researcher at the Alliance, and today he's presenting the business to consumer lock-in effect. Thank you, Marcus.
Yeah, thank you, Veronica, for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for dialing in, and thank you for your interest. For the following 20 minutes, I'd like to talk about the lock-in effect and present them results of a recent study that we conducted. Now, the lock-in effect refers to a situation in which customers and consumers are dependent on a single manufacturer or supplier for a specific service, and cannot move to another vendor without substantial costs or inconveniences. So the reasons and triggers for the lock-in effect can be quite various. They can either be intentionally be included into the design of the business model, like if you have a commitment or a consumer has a commitment to a contract with you, but it can also be unintentionally. For example, if the consumer personalizes his or her product or service in a way, it can also be somewhat unintentional if you rely on network externalities. So this means network externalities refers to a situation where a single person benefits the more people are in the network. So say, for example, if you're using WhatsApp, you'll find most of your contacts from your address book on WhatsApp. Whereas if you use another program like Telegram, you may only find a few of your friends with whom you can chat. So further reasons for the lock-in effect or triggers are some kind of loyalty programs where you give your customers a particular status. It can also refer to training and learning effects of the time that a consumer needs to spend to learn how the product works, to understand the technology and to use the technology. Also has some of its courses in search codes. So if you have different competing services and it takes the customer some time to come up with a decision which service to use, so then he's more likely to remain with your service. Important also in the context of servitizations are dependencies on complementary and compatible products or services, which are offered in addition to the core service or product. And finally, it has something to do with habituation, familiarization with the product or service. I will come back to this list later on. Now, as I mentioned before, in terms of servitization, the lock-in effect becomes somewhat important because in terms of servitizations, companies focus more on outcomes, which means that you do not provide the product itself, but you come up with a lengthy contract or commitment with which you bind your customer to your service, and so you end a long-term relationship with your customers. So often servitization and the lock-in, at least to some extent, go hand in hand. Now, very often the lock-in effect is considered as something favorable, something desirable, because for the company, it can help them to increase customer loyalty. It can create additional cross-selling opportunities. It can bind the customer to the business, and in the end, this all helps to secure constant and recurring revenues. So the lock-in effect is often seen as something really desirable, something really positive. In this presentation now, we also want to show the kind of dark side of the lock-in effect, and that is to say the lock-in effect may, under some particular circumstances, also have some negative consequences. This is particularly the case when the consumer becomes dissatisfied with the service. So in the case that the consumer sees that a competitor comes up with a new technology with better prices, or if you change the pricing policy, this may all annoy the customers. Now, when the customer is bound or locked in in a particular service commitment and cannot change just for another service, he or she may react in a way that is unfavorable. So this may include complaints. This can also mean that in the long run, your reputation and the brand value see some damages. And finally, we have some evidence that it can somehow even get ugly in a way when consumers post their frustrations on social media, or when they try to prevent others from consuming a particular service. So especially in the case when consumers complain about a service or complain about their dissatisfactions privately. So when they do not use the official channels, when they do not call sales support, when they don't call the customer service and so on. So a couple of months ago, we did some research with the Swedish electronics retail chain, and one of their customers got really frustrated about one of their services. But instead of calling the customer service, instead of getting back to the store and complaining about the service, she posted her frustration on Facebook. And within a couple of days and weeks, this post received hundreds of thousands of likes, and other customers also posted their frustration. And it took the Swedish company quite a long time to actually react to it. So only about 3-4 weeks later, they contacted the frustrated customer and gave her a kind of refund. But the story is that the customer did not complain officially, so she didn't ask, can you offer me any kind of compensation, but she just went straight on Facebook and posted her frustration. So this became a really ugly story, and after the company finally reacted, lots of damage has already been caused because other people also added their kind of frustration and added to the situation. Now, with this in mind, we designed a kind of web experiment in which we tested some hypotheses about potential reactions of customers. Potential reactions of customers when they get frustrated in a situation that they are locked in and cannot leave for another service. So we wanted to test under which circumstances do they behave in what way. And what we did in this experiment was that we frustrated the customer in a way, or made them imagine a situation that is quite unfavorable for them. So this can include that they're locked in a service, but someone else comes up with a new technologies which they would rather like to use, but they just can't because they're locked in the contract. Or that one of the competitors is just cheaper, or that one of your customer service employees treated the customers in a rude way, so she gets frustrated and wants to leave but just can't. So what we actually manipulated in this kind of experiment were two things. The first thing was the strength of the lock-in effect. Now the strength of the lock-in effect has something to do with the triggers that cause the lock-in effect. So it depends on how you set up the contract with the customers, depends on if you do have a loyalty program and how long it takes a customer to learn how to deal with the product, to which degree he or she can personalize the project and so on, how many people are in the network. So these are factors that decide how strong or how weak the lock-in effect actually is. And the second thing that we manipulated was the type of relationship that you have with the company has with the customer, or in particular with the service. So this relationship can either be a so-called exchange relationship, which is characterized with functionality and benefits that the service itself provides. So it's just based on the functionality of the different features of the technology and so on. So the customer decides to use the service because he or she is convinced that the service is good and it's a state-of-the-art service with a good functionality which is reliable. Another type of relationship is a so-called communal relationship in which a consumer enters with a business in the case that he or she cannot clearly differentiate between the functionalities and benefits of the product. So if the customer perceives different products and services as somewhat similar, because they do not fully understand the technology or because the benefit seems the same to them, then trust and becomes more important, and the extent to which the consumer thinks that a business is concerned with his or her welfare. So those are two types of two different relationships. And what we did in the web experiment was it was a large-scale experiment with a sample size of over 1,000 participants, and each participant went through a questionnaire. First, the participant entered some kind of personal background about educational background, age, gender, and so on. Then the participant read a first vignette, which is a short text in which we manipulated the relationship with a fictional online service. So this kind of text, there are two different types of texts, and the participant got randomly assigned to one of these two texts. So half of the people read a text in which their relationship was described with a company, with a particular an online service that they're consuming, with which they have a kind of exchange relationship. So a service that they use just for the pure sake of its functionality, whereas the other half of the people read a text about a relationship that they have with exactly the same service, but they perceive the service because they trust it. It's a good one. After that, we did a first manipulation check, which basically meant that we checked, okay, do people in the first group feel that they're in an exchange relationship, whereas do other people think that they're in a communal relationship? So this was successful. Then we went on. Second vignette, another text, described the usage of the service, and in which we manipulated the strength of the lock-in. So half of the people were in a situation with a very strong lock-in effect. Again, this comes to the triggers here on the second slide. So they're bound to a contract, they are in a loyalty program. Many of their friends are using the same service, so they are in this network with their friends. They took them a long time to personalize it and so on. Whereas the other half read a text in which they do not have to pay for it, where they only use it very rarely. It's a simple service, something quite easy. Then again, we checked the manipulation and checked if the people in a strong lock-in felt different than those in a weaker lock-in, which was again successful. Then on the next page, participants got frustrated in a way with the current service, which means in particular we announced that the service provider is about to change the pricing policy, which is unfavorable for the consumer, so which has some kind of disadvantages, and also that the new competitor comes up with a better technology. So they have actually a desire or wish to change, but they can't because they're locked in. So then in the last step, we check with every participant his or her reactions to the situation. So if they immerse themselves in the situation, how would they feel about it, and what would they most likely do? So what we did then was, but I don't want to go into details, we did two analysis of variances because we manipulated two variables, and then we did t-tests on a high significance level and to see if there are significant differences in their reactions to this kind of frustrations. What we found is that first of all, consumers who are in a strong lock-in situation are more likely to remain customers nevertheless, even after a dissatisfying change. And consumers in a communal relationship are also more likely to remain customers after a change that occurred in their relationship, and there are disadvantages for them. So depending on the kind of relationship, your customer may be more or less likely to remain a customer after they get annoyed about a change. And in particular, in a communal relationship, consumers are more likely to condone a negative change for them. So if the lock-in effect is strong and the consumer considers him or herself in an exchange relationship, then what they will do is that they will do, or in theory, do this kind of cost-benefit assessment, and then if they found another service that's more favorable for them, they will just go. And especially if the lock-in effect is weak, then consumers are very likely just to leave and consume another service instead. Whereas in a communal relationship, consumers are more likely to stay, especially if the lock-in effect is strong. But even if the lock-in effect is weak, consumers are maybe rather likely to remain a customer. And we also tested about complaints. And even though consumers in a strong lock-in situation are more likely to remain customers, they're at the same time more likely to complain about the change. But what we did not find is that consumers would not, in a communal relationship, are not more likely to complain than those who are in an exchange relationship. So we didn't find support for this one. An interesting point is that throughout all 4 different groups, so no matter how strong or weak the lock-in effect and no matter in what kind of relationship the consumer is, the intention to complain privately is always much higher than to complain officially. So this means when a consumer gets frustrated, he or she is more likely to chat with friends and say, well, I made this very bad experience, or to post a frustration on social media, or even to prevent others from joining. So when they are asked, what do you think about the service, and the first reaction might be, oh, don't go for it, just don't go for it. So this is I think this is a quite important point, because this is something that company is not immediately aware of, because customers tend not to use the official channels, so not go to a customer service and complain immediately. And what we also found is that in an exchange relationship, the probability to complain privately does not differ between consumers in a strong or weak lock-in effect. And the reason for this could be that these types of customers would actually more base their decisions on information, on cost benefits, analysis, and so on. So if they realize that the situation is getting worse for them, then either they terminate the contract, but then they again have to pay switching costs to consume another service, or they stay. So in both cases, that they're worse off, so they do this kind of analysis. Whereas in communal partnerships, relationships, we found that there is a difference between a strong lock-in situation and a weak lock-in situation. And we also found some kind of, in particular, we found some kind of evidence that consumers may even remain customers in a weak lock-in effect, even though they could just leave, because they trust and that the business cares for their welfare. So they still trust the company. And what then happens is that they somewhat feel annoyed about the change, but at the same time they trust the company. What they then do is that they may have a kind of motivation to reduce their cognitive dissonances and so on, in a way that they condemn some disadvantages. And as a result, they kind of privately and mentally accept and reinterpret the negative changes in order to keep the good relationship alive. Because they trust so much that it's a good relationship, they say, okay, this change is not too bad. I know I could leave, but I don't. And as a result, they somewhat accept the changes. Now, I would like to conclude with some kind of recommendations or implications. The first one is, we hope that with this short presentation, we may have fostered your understanding that a lock-in does not only have positive effects for the business, but some of the consequences can be negative, and in particular, if there are private complaints, they can even get ugly. if you're not fully aware of this in the first place. Second recommendation is you may try to capture and understand private complaints because it might take a long time to become fully aware of it. But in the meantime, the people may have already talked to their colleagues and friends and spread the word about the frustrations and so on. So there should be channels to get in touch with the company and ways to complain more officially, the way that you can react about it. That's not hidden to you. Another recommendation could be to become aware of the kind of relationship that you have with the customer. Is the consumer only using the service because he or she is really convinced about it and fully understands the technology, or might it be the case that the consumer does not fully understand the technology and the service is too complex, because in that case the customer may more trust that they're doing the right thing, and so the reactions might be different. You can also rethink what kind of choices you have about the strength of the lock-in effect, because some of them are intentionally, some of them are unintentionally, something just happened. And finally, if you introduce a new service, be careful to introduce it for free in the first stage. So we found in a literature review or some kind of research that we did recently, we found that in particular in the IT industry, ICT startups are prone to or tend to offer services for free in the first stage, and then to attract a large customer base, and then later on they want to change the pricing policy and finally make money. But then, depending on how strong or not strong your lock-in effect is, your customers may either just immediately leave for another service, or they may get really frustrated. So providing a service in the first place for free might be a source for future conflicts. And with this, I'd like to finish. Well, thank you very much.